We have thought about the basics of nouns here, the cases, pronouns, adjectives. We've begun to think about verbs just generally, looking at subjunctives and imperatives. And now here in Chapter 7, thinking about verbal aspect and generally about principles of linguistics and those principles applied to verbs. I want to walk through the general ideas in Chapter 7 with you here, think specifically about Colossians and how some of these principles can help us in exegesis, and then just look at some vocab. And we are now at the end of Intermediate Greek 1, and next module on to the final. So here we're wrapping up some ideas, and what we see of linguistics here in Chapter 7 are ideas that if you continue on in exegesis classes or advanced studies of Greek grammar, you will employ these principles more and more. Some of the names in the footnotes of Chapter 7 in KMP, you will see those names again and read some of their works. This is a budding field of studies for both New and Old Testaments, and these principles can help us in exegesis. They can be sometimes a bit overdone, maybe too much attention to the trees and not seeing a forest at times, but at times they can be helpful as well. So toward that end of hoping for balance, let's pray and ask for the Lord's help. Lord, we do ask for help in studying your word. We expect it. We expect that you will supply your spirit and help us to know ideas, help us to recognize patterns of use and to be sensitive to those patterns, and then to look at a near context and to do well in communicating the ideas that are in words and phrases and sentences and paragraphs and whole books, even authors and their specific peculiarities, their preferences, and then to communicate these ideas in an understandable way to your people. Help us to use language that's clear and to teach well so that you're glorified. We recognize that your word is not just to be studied but practiced. So let us exemplify that and teach others what we learn. We ask in your Son's name. Amen. So principles of linguistics, that's what we are thinking about here, and especially with verbs and verbal aspect. So aspect is the emphasis of Greek verbs more than the temporal designation. Remember that Greek verbs have both of those ideas. Aspect is the view of the action as it is portrayed by the speaker or writer. The temporal designation is in the background, if you will, as when the action happened, past, present, or future is a little more solid in the future tense form, but aspect takes precedence over the temporal designation. So some general principles here I want to think with you about. And the authors of our textbook provide a really helpful overview of what can be just complex literature and a whole new series of ideas and phrases and jargon even and nomenclature, and the authors here provide a very helpful introduction. So I want you to take that to heart, and I'm going to try to hit the high points. Here's the idea. There's a danger of emphasizing a particular grammatical form or lexical nuance at the expense of a specific literary context and or the way a particular word is normally grammaticalized. So let's unpack that a bit. The danger is we see in one particular grammatical form an idea, and so we emphasize that, and yet we don't recognize that that's the normal pattern of that particular instance, that particular genre, that particular word, or that particular literary context. So we emphasize an idea that the author really isn't emphasizing because that's just the way that author writes, or that's just the way that word is used. We haven't thought about the lexical nuance of that word and its general forms at times and how it might be nuanced here or there, and the literary contextual factors. So here's the key. Know patterns. Know the patterns of how specific words are used, their meanings in certain contexts, and the grammatical forms that they take. And then pay attention to exceptions or shifts, especially in verbal aspect. That being said, we need to clear some ideas in our minds and settle them. Verbal aspect. In elementary Greek, you learn about the tense forms, and we're just trying to differentiate one tense from another. In verbal aspect studies, we are thinking especially about view of the action by the speaker or writer. And we have three aspects. I agree with Kostenberger, Merkel, Plummer that there are three. There's imperfective and ongoing process. That's the action and how it's viewed and how the author or speaker wishes for the audience to understand. It's ongoing. A perfective aspect, that is a completed aspect. Right now, make sure we differentiate perfective aspect from the perfect tense form. Perfective aspect is just completed as a whole. It's that snapshot, as opposed to a video camera showing us a movie ongoing. And then a stative aspect, a whole state of affairs resulting from a previous action. So the stative aspect brings together in some ways the imperfective ongoing and the perfective completed into a state that recognizes at this moment that there have been a series of antecedent actions that bring this situation to its state. So it is viewing an imperfective past series of actions and the perfective whole realized by that series of actions. And that's the perfect tense form. You've probably skipped ahead already and thought of these tense forms and how they work. Imperfective, the present. The continuous this seems to be the present time, the imperfective, ongoing in the past. The aorist, a perfective aspect, just a whole. In elementary Greek, you may have learned this is an undefined aspect or a vague aspect. Perfective is the choice word in Kostenberger, Merkel, and Plummer, and other linguists use the same terminology. And then stativity for the perfect. There is a link here in this module for an article that I wrote in Midwestern Journal of Theology unpacking some of these ideas and looking at them especially in the book of Hebrews, and you can take a look at that this week. Notice then how these various aspects are coded in how a word is formed, not just in what seems to be the case, but morphologically. You can take a look at the textbook to see how these ideas are described, but let's just work left to right and notice that the secondary personal endings, and remember they all have the augment, and that augment indicates time, past time generally. But aspect is also important, and that sigma, especially with the aorist, communicates that perfective aspect, a holistic view of something. But it's argued as well that the future does that. The future provides a future holistic view, and that sigma with perfective aspect. The stative aspect brings together a prefix and a suffix, the kappa suffix and the reduplicative prefix for a stative aspect. And again, that's the perfect tense form. So these aspectual categories are morphologically coded, that is, they are the result of specific letters assembled around a lexical core. And this table presents some of those same ideas in the non-indicatives as well as the indicative. I want to give you opportunity again to look at the textbook. You may want to play back what I've said here so far, but now let's take a look at how these ideas can be presented in your own Greek text. There's a link to my blog and an explanation of how I have marked my Greek text to show verbal aspect throughout, and I have Colossians opened here. This is not new, you've seen it before, but if you haven't had a chance to look at the blog, maybe even pause now and go open up that link, and you can see how I code my Greek Bible so that I can read it and see aspect. For the continuous aspect, just the present, I use a straight underline. For a perfective aspect, I use the U shape here. You can see the verb is blue, infinitive is black, participles are red. The same with the non-indicative here, a subjunctive, an aorist form that shows the perfective aspect. And then the stative aspect, I put a full box around a word. Give me a pause the video, look at that blog, but you can see here that I have verbs coded both color, participles are red, again, infinitives are black. Indicatives, other non-indicative subjunctives are blue. And then for aspect, the U shape is stative. The underlined is the imperfective continuous. And both the present and imperfect tense forms have an underlined. The imperfect, I have a small mark over on the right side. And again, you can look at this in the blog and see the full explanation, but what you can see here in Colossians, again, the perfective and then the stative here. I want to think about how these principles can play out and not making too much of something, but comparing. And here, Colossians 1:16, Chati en auto ektisthe ta panta, entois uranois kai epitesges ta chorata kai ta a orata, ete thranoi, ete kyriatetes, ete arche, ete exousiai, ta panta diautu kai es auton ektistai. Here we have a perfect from katizo and an aorist passive of katizo. Here a perfective, and here stativity. This interplay is something that linguistics would help us to think about and to understand. We would want to look at katizo and how often it's used as an aorist, how often it's used as a perfect, and the idea of creation. Something when we think of God creating, we think of perfective aspect. We think of that being portrayed as something that's completed, just a whole, no progress of any kind. Here, though, the perfective does bring together the whole state of affairs, a process in the past with a completed idea, and you can see how that progress works itself out. And what we would find here, I'm just going to show you a bit and advertise again for the software Accordance. Here we have katizo and katizo, but here the perfect, and here the aorist, down to the perfect. Let's do this. Let's search for katizo, just its lexeme, and let's search for that in the New Testament. And what we'll do is see how often katizo is used, and then look at how it is used. When an author uses this verb, is it perfective, an aorist? Is it more stative, the perfect? And we can take a look here. We begin some in the Gospels, just a couple, and then we get to epistles, which is a better comparison since Colossians is an epistle. Yes, so we want to always consider genre as well, and I'm moving quickly, just one example. But here, used as just quickly looking, aorist, 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 almost always aorist so far, aorist, 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 and now we're in Colossians and we have our two instances, aorist and now the perfect that we're interested in, the whole state of affairs, aorist, 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 and aorist. So we have almost entirely aorist as the choice aspect, and or the choice tense form, and a perfective aspect with the aorist. And that makes sense because something created, it's seen as a snapshot. It's seen as that sort of holistic, there it is. Why then would Paul use the perfect here? Likely because he's just used the aorist, and there's a sense of summing up in the progress of Colossians 1:16, and that may help to explain his choice of the perfect. And that may be something we would want to point out as we would be working through the text, the use of the perfect there. We may also want to look here, we have a perfect then, and then we turn the page, if you will, and I'm on the next page of my Greek text, and we have another perfect. Kai autos estin proponton kai ta ponta anauto sun estaken. And here we're still thinking somewhat about the all and created. He's before all things, and all things in him sun estaken. Hold together, many English translations have, from sunistemi. Let's take a look at that as well. We can just jump here in Colossians from ektistai down to sunesteken, and let's follow that same process. We have a perfect here again. Let's think about this word and how often it's used as a perfect as opposed to other tense forms. This will help us to understand sunistemi and its sort of default, its general use, so we can see if this is an exception or not. Again, we noted, just for review's sake, in here in 1:15, this is a bit of an exception because katizo is normally aorist. It's normally perfective, but here stative, bringing everything together. Here we have another perfect just right away. Why another perfect? What is sunistemi? Is it normally perfect, or is it normally something else? So let's search for the word here, the lexeme, and about 16 instances, fairly similar total in the New Testament to katizo, interestingly enough. One in the Gospels and then mainly in the epistles, bringing together or establishing. Here, a perfect in Luke 9 in the Gospels, and again, we want to look at the context of each of these, but just roughly so you can get an idea of how to go about the kind of practice that Kostenberger, Merkel, and Plummer are suggesting. We look here, we have a perfect, and now we have a present, another present. It's used as a present again, used as a present in 2 Corinthians 3. Another present, another present, another present. Mainly used, it seems, now we have an aorist, another present in 2 Corinthians, and 2 Corinthians has the most location of these. We want to think about that as well. Another present, 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 present. There in Colossians, a perfect, and in 2 Peter, a perfect. So we have mostly the present use of sunistemi here for Colossians 1:17. Now the present would communicate that ongoing process of bringing something together, establishing it. It's continuing on, standing, commending, these kinds of ideas, a broad field of meaning. So what would the perfect mean here? Why bring up sunistemi and the perfect? He is before all things, and all things hold together in him. It may be that aspect of all things continuing to be held together, the state in which they're held is underneath Christ. But one other feature that's important here, this cross-reference of 2 Peter 3:5, translated here with formed or was brought about, also in terms of creation. And sunistemi with the perfect. It may be that it's not just Paul's argument and everything continuing on to be held, but when sunistemi is used with the idea of creation, the perfect becomes the choice over the normal use of the present. So it's these patterns that we want to look at and to think about, and again, having some kind of a code, can be a color code, but especially a shape code. I would suggest, I think mine is a helpful one. You could adjust it as you'd want to, but having that so you can see patterns. You can see the perfect here. You can see the aorist, the perfect aspect versus the stative aspect, and the continuous aspect. So it can be very helpful for you to do that, and I would encourage you to this week. Take a look at those resources then, the article that I wrote and also the blog on how to work through these ideas. Let's look at a few vocab here. Let's look at these words listed beginning with katoikeo and going down to perosmos. Go ahead and repeat after me. You can pause if you would need to. Katoikeo, koilia, kapeao, koluo, Macedonia, Macedonia, the hard K, meros, ta, Megeti, neos, penao, perosmos, ha. Continue to pronounce, and as you read through Greek text, even if you're just mumbling a bit, try to keep reading it. It will become more and more fluid with time. Great work here so far, and looking forward to progressing in Intermediate Greek 2.